out to Socrates. Socrates still trying to get the opening. Oh, Socrates! Whoa!
And there it is. The crazy gang have beaten the Culture Club.
Maggie Thatcher, can you hear me? Maggie Thatcher, your boys took a hell of a beating. Your boys took a hell of a beating.
Hi everyone, Aidan here. Just a brief note to explain that the following episode on the transformational excellence of King Kevin Keegan was recorded some months ago, well before Newcastle United only went and won a trophy. So there will be references to the many years of lack of Geordie success, which may sound a bit odd now that we are officially a club that wins things, which is of course what we are. In my defence, how on earth was I possibly to know that Newcastle would actually win something for the first time in my life and would do it this year? Honestly, how could I have predicted that? But that is what happened, in case you missed it. Anyway, enjoy the pod. Long live King Kev, and however tune.
Welcome to Module 5. I can't believe we made it to 5 already. Of Your Boys Took One Hell of a Beating. And it's a labour of love for Aidan Williams tonight. Kevin Keegan, Newcastle United, 1982 to 1984. Keegan the player in a black and white shirt.
A match Aidan, made in heaven.
This is not a mention of Hereford or Ronnie Radford. Inside, this is all Keegan, all glory. It's Chris Waddle, it's Peter Beardsley, it's Terry McDermott, it's good times, it's Arthur Cox, it's the promised land. Everything's in view.
Exactly.
Not a thing to go wrong here, Aidan.
Oh yeah, I mean, yes, I can already sense the sour taste at the end of it all that's still to come.
Never mind all that. We're not going to touch on what's to come. Beyond the summer 84.
Oh, excellent. Okay,
we're not going to touch on any of that. It's all positivity from start to finish.
This is a Newcastle United rarity for me on any podcast that we do.
Absolutely. So this should be kind of like, this has got to be embraced wholeheartedly.
Just like Keegan himself.
Absolutely. It's just full of positivity. How can you not be? I mean, I've been sat looking up the archive articles, looking at the footage, and there he is with his big beaming face, and everything's awesome. This is proper. It's the Lego movie, but Newcastle United.
Everything is always awesome in Keegan world until the end point.
Never mind the end point, because this is all about the ludicrousness of him choosing Newcastle in so many respects. Newcastle United, though, Aidan, a back catalogue, that is of substance. No matter what we say on so many of these podcasts that we do. Absolutely mammoth football club in the first decade of the 20th century. There's a second coming in the 1920s.
So you had to qualify that, didn't you? Absolutely mammoth football club in the first decade.
But that rumbles on through. Newcastle remain a vaunted football club, a respected football club, despite the peaks and the troughs. Yes, a second division club either side of the Second World War, but primarily a first division club, Cup Kings of the 1950s. Those icons that Keegan, because it's the heartstrings that brings Keegan to Newcastle in the first place.
It is.
It's his family heritage. There's so many reasons, and we'll go into the wider aspects of how he ends up as a Newcastle player, and the fact that Manchester United were sniffing around him. First division Manchester United, even them being Manchester United, they are sniffing around him. They've got European football in 1982, 83. There's talk of Chelsea, albeit a second division Chelsea. Charlton Athletic throw their hat in very, very late. Obviously, they would have the Alan Stevenson version of all this as well, which probably needs a module all of its own.
Yes, they're just going down the list of European Player of the Year, aren't they?
They are, absolutely. They couldn't have the Keegan version, so they'll go for Alan Stevenson instead. But Newcastle is a football club, that the club that Keegan's been brought up upon the legend of.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talked about them being massive at the start of the 21st century. Well, they were. They won the league 3 times in 4 or 5 years. An FA Cup in there as well. And in fact, they were champions or runners-up in something 7 years in a row, which, if that was to happen today, I think my head would explode, frankly. This truly was the glory days, yet to be repeated, but it was a long time ago. Yeah, little rise again in the 20s when Hughie Gallagher was around, scoring plenty. Another league championship then,
yep.
yeah.
League champions 1926-27, FA Cup winners in 1924. So the second Wembley final in that respect. 1920, you've got fifth, fourth, sixth champions. A swathe of consistency and relevancy there, Aidan.
Absolutely, that's what we're known for. Also, what we're known for in the start of the 20th century is revolutionising the offside trap and changing the laws of the game as a result. Because it used to be that there had to be 3 defenders between an attacker, or 3 plus the goalie. I don't know what it was, but anyway, it was a lot. There were 3 between the attacker and the goal when the ball was played through. And Bill McCracken, legendary Northern Irish defender for Newcastle United at that time, who won all those 3 league championships and FA Cup as well. He got so adept at the offside trap way before Tony Adams and Steve Bold ever thought of stepping up and putting their arms in the air. So adept he got that they had to change the law. So there's one claim to fame, as well as all those bits of silverware at that time as well. But then, yes, we go into Hughie Gallagher as the big hero, and he's one that Keegan was brought up on memories of from his grandfather, who, if you actually see a picture of his grandfather on Wikipedia, his face is identical to Kevin Keegan.
Isn't it?
Just with a little moustache. It's uncanny. It's freaky. It's like he's gone in a time machine, put on a comedy moustache and a hat, and sat there for a picture. It's incredible. But then, of course, into the 50s, as you say, the FA Cup kings there, 3 cup wins in 4 years. Jackie Milburn, the big hero, of course, there, along with Joe Harvey, Bobby Mitchell, George Robledo as well, bringing a bit of exoticism to it all. And this was under the leadership of Stan Seymour, a former player, someone who will feature heavily. He was chairman by the time Keegan joined, I think, still, or at least he was in the 70s. Mr. Newcastle, as he was known. So he was there throughout all of this. But yeah, Jackie Milburn and Hughie Gallagher were the 2 heroes of those 2 different eras that had a big impression on the Keegan family, his paternal family, who were all from Newcastle. And this is where the connection starts.
As part of this, I mean, I said it was all going to be positivity, but there is that slip into the second division. But they come back, and while they're never quite the Newcastle of that first decade of the 20th century, the 20s, even into the early 30s, there's another FA Cup win in 1932, the cup glories of the 50s, which gives Newcastle the lustre and the legend that goes along with them. There is the Intercity's first cup in '69. To date, the last trophy that Newcastle won.
Well, I will pick you up on that one. I was anticipating this. Newcastle have also won the Anglo-Italian Cup in 1973, which I think we can all agree was the biggest trophy won by a North East side that year. They then won the Texaco Cup, which was a whole British situation going on, in 75 and 76. So, I think you need to...
Pre-ZDS Cup, ZDS Cups. You needed the Debenhams Cup to make it a treble there.
Well, yeah, I know. And it was probably 2006 or 7 or something like that. They also won, in inverted commas, the Intertoto Cup, which is you just like the last man standing of those, because it didn't come to an end. It's just whoever went furthest in the UEFA Cup or whatever.
Was there actually a trophy for the Intertoto Cup?
I believe there was. I think there was an on-pitch presentation. Scott Parker, I think, is who I recall having to lift that. But it was just before a game. He just got given it and didn't have a clue what was going on, because it's like, okay, we just happened to have been the team who survived the Intertoto and then went the longest in the UEFA Cup. I didn't even get towards the end of it, but so there you go. But yeah, okay, fair enough. 1969 was the last proper trophy.
Fantastic.
But I mean, that was a great one. Like, the memories of that will have been obviously that still gets talked about lots, because that is the last time there was a proper trophy win. Bobby Moncur being captain, but also hero in a few of those games, scoring rare goals.
Rare goals, yeah.
Which is quite something. And he now lives next door to my brother-in-law in Gateshead. So that's another thing to note. But Wyn Davies was in there. Pop Robson as well was someone who played an awful long time with Newcastle. Frank Clark also. And you had Joe Harvey as the manager who'd been part of the 1950s Cup side. So this was, big names, big heritage and all at that time. What could go wrong in the 70s? Nothing.
But even then, the 70s kind of like, they fluctuate quite impressively. The goals of Malcolm McDonald, it's stunning the amount of goals he scores. 30 just in the league in 71, 72, 25 in 72, 73, 28 in 73, 74, another 32 in 74, 75. There's a Newcastle team that reaches the 1974 FA Cup final that we don't need to speak about too much, Aidan, because this is a 1980s podcast.
Well, Keegan was there, of course, famously.
Absolutely. Keegan had a say in that one. And then 2 years later, it's the League Cup final against Manchester City. There's European qualification, a fine. League consistency in 76, 77 that yields a 5th place finish. This is a Newcastle that are bubbling along quite nicely until the loss of McDonald and other factors. I think we can throw in there leads to the relegation of 78, and it's a very dysfunctional Newcastle United from the 1978 relegation through to the summer of 1982. It's a club very much in decay, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, well, even slightly before the relegation, like the managerial merry-go-round, you had Gordon Lee for a couple of years in the mid-70s, and he was obviously part of the 76 group that went to that League Cup final. But then you had Richard Dinnis briefly in 1977, and then Bill McGarry for a few years, but he was in charge of the real decline, I guess.
Yeah. And Bill McGarry, we'll just throw Bill McGarry into that. It's a fascinating one, is that he did so well with Wolves. He was the man that took Wolves to League Cup final success, to the UEFA Cup final, to FA Cup semi-finals. If ever, you'd think there's a manager and a club in McGarry and Newcastle that should have done well together, but did they conspire against each other? Is what other circumstances in that respect?
Well, I think we're heading into an era of financial issues for the club and boardroom issues as well. I mentioned about Stan Seymour previously, and he was a long-time chairman. But I think, given he was rather elderly by these points, it all got a bit, maybe the focus wasn't where it should have been, and it led to various wranglings. But I think, essentially, though, the main thing is that the playing squad declined rapidly. I think through the early 70s, and obviously Malcolm McDonald was the principal among this. Once he'd gone and a few of the others who'd been there for quite some time left, the squad didn't adapt and evolve properly, and whether that was to do with lack of finance or what, I don't really know. But it definitely just set on a downward path that was very much still the case when we get to 82. So it was a few years of suffering in the mire, I guess, of mid-table, second-tier stuff. And not really inspiring much of anything.
8th place in 1978-79, 9th in 79-80, 11th 80-81, and 9th in 81-82.
Yeah, so safely not troubling. There's no playoffs, of course, in these days, so it was top 3.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nowhere near.
1980-81 would be very satisfying for Stuart Horsfield. 14 wins, 14 draws, 14 defeats.
Oh, beautiful.
A magnificent amount of symmetry on the go there for that particular season.
But it's not the kind of thing that promotion campaigns are made of.
No, not at all. 1980-81, Bobby Shinton is top scorer with 7 goals. It just shows where Newcastle have managed to contrive to place themselves. Imre Verardi does come in and start scoring goals from 1981, the much-travelled but often prolific Imre Verardi. It's a step in the right direction, although there's not much improvement, not a huge amount of improvement in statistical terms.
But I think he's the first green shoot of...
there's positivity there, isn't
exactly.
there, in Imre Verardi.
And then you've obviously got Chris Waddle coming through at this point, his debut. He joined age 19, famously from the sausage factory, but he was 19 when he joined. So by modern perception, that's a little bit late to be starting, but that's what it was. And he made his debut in 1980. So this is around the time Imre Varadi was about to come in as well. And these were the first green shoots, and Arthur Cox was obviously there by this point as well. He was a bit of a hard taskmaster as well, Arthur Cox, but he obviously did get things in a little more in order than they'd been able to be previously. But equally, it's circumstance. As you say, the previous managers had done well in other places, largely. It just, sometimes it's the right person at the wrong time, or the wrong person at the right time, or whatever it may be. It just never quite works. But yeah, Imre Varadi was he was the main player when I went to my first ever Newcastle United game, which I believe was in early 1981. No, it was January 1981. Second tier, Newcastle 2, Bolton 1. And I remember thinking late in the game when Bolton were really trying to attack for an equaliser, and I asked my dad, why are they really trying hard? Why are they really trying to win? Like trying to score? It just baffled me. Why wouldn't they just let Newcastle have it by this point? He was trying to explain, well, they're only a goal down. They want to equalise, No, just let us win. And also up front that day was Mick Harford, but he had a less than glorious career with Newcastle, and of course went on to much bigger and better things elsewhere, as most players did from this era.
Indeed they did. But that all changes. August 1982, Kevin Keegan's just been to an unsatisfying World Cup by his personal point of view. England have gone to Spain, played 5 games, returned unbeaten, conceded only 1 goal, but become increasingly pragmatic as the tournament has gone on. 3-1 win against France, 2-0 win against Czechoslovakia, sneaker 1-0 against Kuwait when they're already through, 2 goals draws against West Germany and Spain to see them out in the second group stage of that 1982 World Cup. And Keegan, along with Brooking, are on the sidelines for the vast majority of it, apart from 20 minutes or so against Spain when England are backed into a corner where they need goals. Keegan's just had 2 years at Southampton. He'd left Liverpool in 1977, wanting a fresh challenge, wanting to play abroad, wanting to test himself, went to Hamburg, bade farewell to Liverpool by winning the 1977 European Cup final, signs for Hamburg, 3 years there, twice European Footballer of the Year, wins the Bundesliga title 78-79, plays another European Cup final in 1980 against Nottingham Forest, but is frustrated a 1-0 defeat. Shelton outstanding that night, even though we often critique his goalkeeping, shall we say, on this podcast. But yeah, Keegan kind of goes and has these 2 years at the Dell with Southampton under Larry McMenemy, where he's actually at his most prolific. He'd never been overly prolific as a Liverpool player. I think he scored 100 goals overall in league and cup across his 6 years. So quite, a steady goal scorer rather than an out-and-out goal scorer, but as part of a different role that he was playing. Sometimes in midfield, sometimes the man off the big man in Toshak. Goes to Hamburg, plays fantastically with them. Goes to Southampton and he is the focal point of their attack. Scores goals galore. This is a very different Keegan. He's added more to his game since going abroad. Comes back, has these fantastic 2 years at Southampton, then decides I need something different. And just one of those Keegan whims that will crop up here and there. And the summer of 82 decides enough's enough at Southampton. I want something different, and that's something different turns out to be Newcastle United, despite the interest of Manchester United.
Well, he wouldn't be the last player to opt for Newcastle and home ties over going to Manchester United and promises of glory. But that's another story for a different decade. Yeah, I think he'd had fallings out with Laurie McMenemy by the end at Southampton as well, in terms of bits of criticism that had come the team's way from certain games, and also lack of strengthening in various key areas. So, yeah, I think he decided, yes, he needed to be out of there by that point and have a new challenge. But I think it's all about this is the autumn years of his career, I guess, and that plays into it a lot with the decision to drop down a division and go to Newcastle United. I think if this had been a prospect a couple of years earlier, it would have been rather less enticing to him. But given the stage he was in his career, but he still, at this point though, he still thought he had an England career, didn't he? You know, he hadn't given up on that. And famously, Bobby Robson came to see him at Newcastle in August, September time, and told him that he would see him at the next England camp before never ever picking him for England. So that was one thing. But you know, it's the ties to his family that's what's prompted this choice clearly at this time. The actual negotiations for his signing did not take very long at all. It was done and dusted really, really quickly, and you know, within a day or so of deciding to move, he was being unveiled at a press conference just along the road from where I'm speaking now, actually, the Gosforth Park Hotel. But yeah, it's all about his family. So his father's family from Newcastle. His father and uncle were Newcastle fans. His grandfather was a Newcastle fan. They'd moved to Yorkshire for work, so this is why he ended up being born in Doncaster. But you know, he grew up, as we say, instilled with Newcastle United and tales of Hughie Gallagher and Jackie Milburn and the rest. So that strong, deep bond with the city and the club was there for him long before he ever showed up as a player and later as a manager. This wasn't some bond that he developed having been a player, which happens for some. This was something that was already there in him. But yeah, this was quite remarkable, though, from a Newcastle perspective, to be signing a two-time European Footballer of the Year as a second division team who, as you've said, their various finishing positions in the preceding few years were not ones that make you think promotion is on the cards. And yet there he was. And, you know, the local newspaper when he signed just simply had a big picture of him. And here he is was the headline, and that was it. It almost, I guess, seemed like a homecoming, even though in many ways it wasn't. But you know, the family ties kind of made it sense that way. But from the Newcastle fans' perspective, it was just something, a bolt from the blue of like, how on earth have we managed to sign somebody of the stature of Kevin Keegan whilst we're languishing in mid-table of the second division? It's just unfathomable. But, you know, he stated himself that coming to play for Newcastle felt like coming home. The welcome he got, the sheer amount of people and noise and sort of excessive joy at it took him a bit by surprise as well, I think, because I think given the lack of any success and the lack of any real hero since Malcolm McDonald had left, there hasn't really been a proper hero to cling on to since then. And then suddenly here he comes from nowhere, and everybody latches onto him. Of course, why wouldn't you? You know, this is a level or two above anyone else who'd played for Newcastle for a long, long time. So this was absolutely remarkable. He described it himself as a bit of a deification, and obviously this wouldn't be the last time that kind of terminology would be used in terms of Keegan and Newcastle United. Maybe we don't do ourselves any favors by going so far, but you know, it's when you're starved of anything, any success or any superstar, and one suddenly turns up, well, you cling on to that. He made his debut against QPR, I think it was, and he scored on his debut. And you know, the atmosphere on this occasion, I was far too young to be able to experience it, sadly. But you know, for everything I've read about it, the noise was beyond anything that had been at St. James's for a long time, if ever, in quite that way. Keegan also, having scored that goal, did something slightly unusual for him in throwing himself into the crowd as though he was showing he was one of them. That's how it was interpreted and that's how it was taken. But it just felt like a connection, I think. You know, this was just... it was the right person at the right time coming to the right place. He had never been at Newcastle before, and yet it seemed like the homecoming, like I say. It seemed like the right person to be there, and he could inspire so much, and that's the perception that many would have had. He would now be the one to inspire us back to where we haven't been for a few years, but where we feel we belong. After that celebration, when he hugged the crowd, he was quoted in the press afterwards saying, "Well, I just wanted to stay there forever." But then what he led into was that he never ever wanted to let those people down, and I don't know whether that's an attitude he'd always had, because I imagine so, because he was a player he was super talented, but he actually drove himself on beyond his talent, I think, in many ways, to become one of the best players in the world, certainly for a number of years. I don't think he was as talented as some others, despite being very talented, but he got far more out of it than they did. And I think this constant need to make sure you didn't let people down and make sure the fans got everything from you that you felt, or that they felt they should be getting, and that's what he was always wanting to do. But that same attitude is echoes of the manager he would become. He often spoke about not wanting to let the fans down and not wanting to do anything that would sour any relationship or anything like that. So I think there's a lot of echoes there. But yeah, he instantly became the senior member of the squad. There was people like David McCreary and Terry McDermott came back to Newcastle around this time as well. And he had a strong relationship with Arthur Cox too. We talked about how he was quite a taskmaster at times, but Keegan was obviously in a different status, and they talked a lot about different players and different ways of doing things and different approaches and so on. So I think, again, as much as Keegan hadn't given any thought to football management at this point, you can see the type of person he was able to offer opinions on such things, and it was welcomed by Cox, and he actually actively sought it out from Keegan. But I think that's only natural when you suddenly have a European Footballer of the Year in amongst a mid-tier second division side.
Absolutely. I mean, just looking at some of the players that became his teammates that year, John Anderson, Kevin Carr. Well, Mick Shannon's knocking around for a very short period of time that season. Howard Gale will come on loan, do exceptionally well, but they wouldn't have the money to sign him. Peter Haddock, as you mentioned, David McCreary. Terry McDermott would be signed, I think it was around about the September, October-ish, brought in. A young Neil MacDonald, Chris Waddle, Imre Varadi, and Kenny Wharton. So, an interesting mix of players there. The form isn't particularly fantastic. That bright start, the debut victory over QPR, 35,718, double the previous season's average, showed just what the interest was. Soon followed by another victory at Blackburn, but then they won just 5 of the next 22, and they were 14th in mid-January. Yet Keegan's enthusiasm just doesn't abate, and soon enough he's clicking into gear with McDermott, just as he had done at Liverpool, and certainly in the latter stages that last season, 76-77, when Liverpool win the European Cup, win the league title, reach the FA Cup final. And McDermott's got something to prove because he's lost his way at Liverpool, and then there's Chris Waddle, really coming into his own. So it's a very much a project in process in 82-83. There's a down before the up comes, Aidan.
Yeah, definitely. But you can see as you list the names there of people who are a bit better known than some of if we'd read out a squad from a couple of years earlier. There's far more known in there, and you can see it's starting to build. You're starting to get some of the pieces in place that would actually help cause that rise. But yeah, they ended up finishing 5th, which actually seems a little too high considering the runs of poor form that they had at times. I guess that shows that they finished quite well, which again shows it's building towards what was to come the season after. I mean, Keegan himself described it as a flattering league position. I think that's fair, given the way it had played out. And as you say, being very much in the bottom half of things in mid-January. So they did improve towards the end. And I guess you could put that down to there had been several new signings. experienced players as well in some of those, and I think it just takes a bit of time for it to gel and the team to come together. But that was definitely becoming the case towards the end. So much bigger improvement on towards the end. You know, they were ultimately in the promotion mix or on the edges of it, but given the start, they were too far behind. Ultimately, though, I think they were only 3 points shy of promotion, which, given some of the runs of form, is really, really poor. But I guess to put the positive spin on it, from 14th in mid-January to missing promotion by only 3 points shows that they were on an upward trajectory.
Oh, they absolutely were. I mean, they lose 2-0 at QPR at Loftus Road on mid-January, and then they lose only 3 more times in the league, with those defeats all coming on the road. Burnley, they lose at Burnley, they lose at Derby, and they lose at Cambridge. Cambridge in late April is the one that kind of like fully, it finally kind of like deflates the potential for promotion. But the bounce back there is that it put 5 past Barnsley a few days later at Oakwell, and they defeat Sheffield Wednesday on the final day, or the penultimate day, 2-1, end with a 2-2 draw against Wolverhampton Wanderers. So, there's some cracking results there in that run. The 4-0 against Rotherham. There's 4-2 against Charlton. They defeat a decent Blackburn Rovers side. They put 4 past Grimsby. So there's clearly, they beat Leeds United 2-1 in mid-April. They win at Crystal Palace. This is a much improved set of results, and it's kind of the scene setting for what's going to come in 1983-84.
Yeah, certainly. Like I say, they're on the upward trajectory. I think it still wasn't exactly plain sailing the following year either. There was definitely a little hit and miss at times, but I think the defeats were a little more sporadic. There were more wins, and they didn't get stuck in too much of a rut like they did early on in the preceding season. I guess the only spell the following year, well, they had a couple of defeats early on actually, but then went on a lengthy run of no defeats for a couple of months before stumbling in November, December. But they had 2 defeats in a row in December the following year, 83-84, but that was against the 2 sides who would ultimately finish ahead of them for promotion, Chelsea and Sheffield Wednesday. So overall, they weren't dropping points that frequently to those that they needed to finish ahead of. I think that's the main point. And the wins were far more often. There was a spell of 6 wins in a row just prior to those defeats. There was a spell later in the season of 8 or 9 games unbeaten through late winter into spring, and finished strongly as well. So ultimately, though, it was a far more positive season all around. And I think we can just put that down to what we said for the latter couple of months of the preceding season. It had all just come together now. The positivity was actually, well, Keegan's someone who emanates positivity, like we say, and I think it spreads. He's one of those characters who it's impossible not to warm to for all the failings he has. He's such an openness and such a, I don't know, naive belief, if you like, in everything is going to work out great if only we all get together and work hard together. Like, it'll all be good and it'll all be okay. I think it's infectious the way he is. I think we saw that a lot with him as a manager. But I'm absolutely sure that because of the status he was now in his career and what he had achieved prior to coming to Newcastle, that everything he then did was infectious to everybody around him. And now the squad had people who were not just willing, but capable of following along with him. By this point, Chris Waddle is coming more into the talent he was going to become. And I think for him to be playing alongside somebody like Kevin Keegan it must have been a wonderful, wonderful way to start a career. And of course, there was somebody else who'd arrived, because we'd lost Imre Varadi by this point as well. He'd disappeared off in summer of '83, top scorer for the last 2 seasons. So he'd finished top scorer of 82-83 ahead of Kevin Keegan. And he went off to Sheffield Wednesday, promotion rivals. But early in the season, Keegan was apparently woken up 1 a.m. by a phone call from Arthur Cox to tell him that they'd signed Peter Beardsley from Vancouver Whitecaps. Now, Cox thought that Keegan would like him, but Keegan obviously had never heard of him, was undoubtedly sceptical about anyone who was signing from Vancouver Whitecaps, as you would be, really. And when he first came along to training, not only Keegan, but a few of the others thought, by the looks of him, scrawny little guy who didn't appear very athletic. He was just somebody who'd won a competition to train with the team. That's the perception that they had of a young Peter Beardsley. But when they saw him in action, obviously that changed rapidly, and he, probably even more so than Waddle, benefited from that time with Keegan, because I think ultimately he grew into the type of player that Keegan was, becoming that, not the out-and-out striker, but the sort of perfect foil to them. A super talented forward that could do a little bit of everything and do it with a high degree of panache and style. So now we've got him to add into the mix, along with Waddle, who's developing rather impressively as well. Keegan, we've got McDermott behind with all that experience, and some of those others you mentioned, where on the defensive side, there's people who would be around for quite some time at Newcastle and would spend a lot of time there. And I think it was all just gelling, and it was a team, whereas previously it had just been a collection of individuals who just happened to be wearing the same shirt. And I think that galvanizing effect of Kevin Keegan adding into these two generational local talents that were coming through just made it for quite an intoxicating mix. And yeah, like I mentioned, it was a little bit up and down still through the season, but ultimately it was more than enough to get them across the line that they needed to get.
Another introduction to this one as well is the signing of Glenn Roeder from
exactly. Yeah, another one who'd be there for a long time, and
so suddenly there's a noticeable spine running through that side. Yeah, there's a bit of to and fro between the goalkeepers now as Kevin Carr's challenged by Martin Thomas, so they kind of share the duties. Carr plays 19 league games to Thomas's 23, but beyond that, that's a far more solid defence now. And then McDermott is still performing at a high quality. He doesn't miss a league game. He scores 6 goals in the league, adds another one in the League Cup. Chris Waddle is in full flow, and like you say, Peter Beardsley, the difference. And at the beginning of the season, to lose Verardi looked like the classic Newcastle step backwards. Yet, yes, Verardi scores these goals that will lead Sheffield Wednesday to promotion as well. Yet the shift from Verardi to Beardsley is absolutely massive.
It's a little bit like what would come later on with Keegan, the manager. So goal-scoring hero David Kelly getting sold, and we replace, Peter Beardsley again in that case. And a couple of years later, Andy Cole, obviously, and ultimately the replacement was Les Ferdinand. And in those cases, it was a step up, as was this. The years in between were not so kind from that front, but there's echoes there and parallels, I think, into the time of Keegan as the player and Keegan as the manager.
Just looking at the stats there are unreal. For the 4 main protagonists of that side that are so look towards in Keegan, Beardsley, Waddle and McDermott. If I've got my sums right there, between the 4 of them, they were responsible for 71 league goals in 1983-84 for Newcastle, and they swiftly became kind of everyone's favourite other team. There was so much attention drawn upon this Newcastle United for certainly kind of like that turnaround in the late January of 1983, rumbling all the way through 83, 84. And what can't be undersold as well is just how strong the second division was that year. You're looking at, it's along with Newcastle, up go Sheffield Wednesday as mentioned, but Chelsea as well. The Chelsea of a burgeoning Kerry Dixon, and there's David Speedy and all of that in a second division that also has Manchester City, Brighton and Hove Albion, Leeds United, Middlesbrough, all recently of the first division. This is a season in which Derby County and Swansea City are relegated to the third division. Swansea fresh out of the first division at the end of the 1981-82 season. So the 1982-83 season. The strength of that second division, Aidan.
Yeah, absolutely. It really was. And like we say, it's only 3 to go up. There's no playoff. So actually, you have to be at the sharp end. There's no sort of coming off the rails towards the end and hoping to sneak into the top 6 and have an opportunity based on form. It's very cut and dried in these days. But no, there was a lot of quality, and several teams who would obviously go on to promotion themselves in and around these coming years, or had been up in the top flight just beforehand. And equally, in these days, if you came down from the top flight, you didn't necessarily sell everybody because the differential was so huge. It wasn't so that you quite often had very talented squads and players playing in the second tier, far more so than would be the case now. And I think that just simply added to the strength. But yeah, you're looking at the list of names of teams alone, in many respects, save for obviously a few obvious additions, it was one that wouldn't be massively out of place in the top flight for many of those teams.
Absolutely. I mean, that other teams to throw into the hat there, Grimsby Town that were kind of flirting with first division possibilities during those early to mid 1980s. An ambitious Blackburn Rovers who would be denied top flight for until 1992, but came close many times during the 1980s. Fulham, mid-table. Charlton Athletic, as earlier mentioned, and the Alan Siemens experiment. Such an array of teams there that were capable of doing things. An unbelievably strong second division that year.
And even going down, we've got Swansea, who had been in the top flight not long before.
Yeah, they'd gone down 82-83 and Derby County 79-80.
Yeah, recent league champions, of course. Derby County is not that long.
Less than a decade before prior to this, they were champions. FA Cup semi-finalists, 1976.
But Leeds is the start one, I think. They ended up finishing 10th, and obviously we're not that far a decade from the sort of latter years of their greatest era ever, and yet they've sunk quite a bit. But obviously, still the stature and size of them was quite something. It would be a few years until they really got their act together, I think. But it just shows the quality that was down there. As
mentioned, we'll run through the results. Again, start with a win at Leeds, lose opening home game against Shrewsbury Town, lose an early, clash with Middlesbrough at Urson Park 3-2. There's what 1, 2, 3. They win only 3 of the first 7. But then they rattle off this run of 6 successive victories through October into early November. But then they slip to defeat quite spectacularly. 4-0 at Chelsea, 4-2 at Sheffield Wednesday, back-to-back defeats against the two teams that will eventually go up alongside them. But through Christmas, it's still very much 2 steps forward, 1 to the side, 1 back. But then, just as the previous season, it's another strong finish. There's only 2 defeats from mid-February onwards. And that's again against Sheffield Wednesday at St James Park. And a ludicrous defeat away to Cambridge United. A Cambridge United who will win only 4 games all season. In one of the most spectacular relegations, would eventually be back-to-back relegations, which need a module of themselves. They are that much of a work of art. But yeah, goals for fun, as you say. 5 past Manchester City, 5 past Carlisle United, 4 past Derby County. And, it just rumbles on and on and on. As part of this as well, Newcastle were out of the first hurdle in the League Cup, beaten in a replay at a burgeoning Oxford United. And the FA Cup, Aidan. I remember this game massively. It was on the Friday night, and I was there. It was a game that drew huge attention on Merseyside because it was Keegan coming back in a Newcastle shirt. He'd been back in a Southampton shirt a couple of times, but in a Newcastle shirt, along with Terry McDermott, and this whole buzz that was surrounding Newcastle at the time. And, I think there were some people who thought that Newcastle were going to give Liverpool a game. And it didn't turn out that way, but it was a glimmer for Newcastle of, this is where you can be heading if you get this right. here are big time games and big moments to embrace. And yeah, it ended up in a 4-0 defeat. But I remember the vast amount of Newcastle fans at Anfield that night, and the noise that they made, and the noise that it kind of inspired the Liverpool fans to make. And it was one of the loudest domestic games of football I've ever been witness to.
Well, it was a memorable occasion here as well. Am I right in thinking it was live on television on a Friday night?
It was a game live on the BBC. Were showing Friday night football, which people still frown about now. But I love Friday night football on the back of those days when the BBC was showing them.
So this, because it was an FA Cup game, they had it live, and this was a big deal here. And I vividly recall the lead up to it probably more than the game itself, of just the excited chatter about it. As you say, it's a look at the promised land, I guess, of what might be to come, rather than anything that me or my friends at the time had any recollection of. I had no understanding of Newcastle as a top flight team at all at this stage. I'd never known it. So this was a step into the unknown, but equally so for many on the pitch. What I do remember is some of you talk about the crowd noise and so on. I vividly remember Newcastle fans singing it, presumably in the last few minutes, about all we are seeing is give us a goal. And, didn't quite happen. However, earlier in the game, though, what is very, very significant, aside from the occasion and the enormity of it and the attention, or I guess that's something to say, is the attention being given Newcastle United. Okay, the returning hero is the big aspect to it, of course. And that's presumably why it was selected for TV. But equally, part of the reason will have been because Newcastle were on the rise with Keegan, and therefore bringing that attention onto the club where it hadn't had any for quite some time was a big deal for us here, which is why there was so much excited chatter about it, even amongst 9-year-olds like I was at the time. But the other significant thing is that this was also the day that Keegan realised he had to retire because of what happened in this game.
Yeah, the double-edged coin, isn't it?
It's showing that we're on the right path. We couldn't compete on the pitch, but this is Liverpool on the way to a European Cup final after all. It's not like
and this wasn't a Liverpool. So this wasn't an era in which we'll pull our punches and play.
No, that didn't happen in those days.
Half a team of reserves. This is the strongest Liverpool lineup available to Joe Fagan.
Exactly. So there was no contest really, but. Maybe it would have gone differently had an incident earlier in the game gone a different way, because Keegan managed to get himself through on goal, and I think it was 0-0 at the time. And he wasn't a slouch, but he'd lost it a yard or two clearly, because while he was racing through, thinking about how he was going to get past Grobbelaar, Mark Lawrenson caught him up and tackled him and won the ball off him, and the chance had gone before he'd even realised what was going on. Now, this obviously was an isolated incident in the game. Sure, these kind of things happen, but in Keegan's mind, this kind of, I guess, must have confirmed what he was probably already starting to feel a little bit anyway. But he'd been up against second division teams and second division defences, and maybe there was a little slight difference in speed and pace of the game and of the best players. But this moment basically made Keegan realise he'd lost his pace. And while the game ended, clapping the supporters and all that, he had by that point already decided this was it. This was his last season as a footballer. He thought that maybe if he was to extend his career and play, if Newcastle went up, it was very much an if still at this point, he would have to change his style. But he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to sort of go out remodelling himself into a more withdrawn player or whatever. I think he wanted to go out on a high, and therefore, before he lost too much more, he'd made the decision that this was going to be it. And that in itself was a very, very big deal, of course. I think that only became apparent a little later, but that was very much the night and moment that sealed that in his mind.
Indeed, it was. But still, a landmark night in so many respects. Both, the result wasn't brilliant. Yes, it's the epiphany for Keegan that, nights like that and occasions like that are going to be a bridge too far for him, approaching 33. But like you say, that I don't know, that flash, that image of better times to come and what you're about to be leaving behind. 13,000 Newcastle fans at Anfield that night, reputedly. A hell of a following, which if the 33,000 attendance is to be believed, which I wouldn't fully believe, because that my mind's eye that night is there weren't many empty specks in Anfield that night, in an era in which shall we say that the divulgence of actual attendances were somewhat skimmed lower in announcements. I'm led to believe at Anfield. It was Newcastle fans, at least a third, I would say, Newcastle fans at Anfield there that night. It's kind of like the big time again for Newcastle.
Oh, very much so. I think this was, they hadn't had anything like it for several years. As much as we've talked about some of the big teams that were in the second tier and big venues to go to, obviously this was a whole different thing for him as well. Obviously, it was a huge moment going back to Liverpool. Yeah, he'd been back with Southampton, but I think because this particular game, because it was a cup game, because it was something that was unexpected, it was a bonus, if you like, for Keegan and for Newcastle United that they got to go there. They got to have the TV cameras, and everyone got to see, not for the last time, the sort of fan defiance in the face of a team that can't compete on the pitch. There's some solace in that, I suppose, but that's probably a small time mentality. But that's what Newcastle were at the time, without question. And so, you take those moments, and it of all the games in this stint for Keegan, it's odd that a 4-0 defeat is something that is kind of still seismic and memorable for all that it was. As you say, it's about the promise of what might be to come. And let's remain positive on that without going into anything that maybe did come. But yeah, exactly. It was huge. And it was such a change, obviously, from the humdrum of the league to have such focus. You didn't get this. You didn't get live games very often at all. And so to have Newcastle United on a live game, that's what I say. I just remember it so well that this happened. I was out at some club, I can't even remember what, but I was out at something after school that evening, and there was so much chatter about it. It's like, you're going to watch? Are you going to watch? And even at that, I suppose it was a Friday night, so a bit more allowance for staying up. But, I was still quite young to be staying up watching live football until late in the evening. But that was very much allowed that night.
Absolutely. So it should as well. Shades kind of Scotland going up against Brazil in the '82 World Cup. It's kind of like, I mean, I always look at that Scotland-Brazil game, the '82 World Cup, and think how glorious Scotland are as being part of that game. And there's a gloriousness to being involved in an occasion like that, even when you're on the receiving. I even as a Liverpool fan, I have vibes about that, about when Flamengo took us apart in the World Club Championship game in Tokyo in '81. It's kind of like you can almost bask in a kind of defeat like that and say, actually, it was a privilege to be on the punch line of that one.
Yeah, but I think it's because of the occasion as well, and you say the atmosphere. It just made it a special event.
Absolutely. The running for Newcastle, they do. They hit the rocket boosters, and beyond that defeat at Anfield in the Cup, there are only 4 league defeats. I say the defeat 3-1 at Crystal Palace, 1-0 at home to Grimsby, that loss at home to Sheffield Wednesday, and the peculiar one at Cambridge. 3 games to go after that. It is a case of them counting down to promotion. As we've said, only 3 going up, 3 automatically. It's still the days of 3 up, 3 down. Eventually, Newcastle will finish 10 points clear of Manchester City and Grimsby Town, their nearest rivals for that 3rd promotion place. Chelsea and Sheffield Wednesday will finish on 88 points, with Chelsea taking the title by virtue of a better goal difference. by 12 goals, and Newcastle are clear in third place. It's in that respect, there wasn't that sense of peril towards the end of the season in terms of missing out on promotion, but it still had that kind of to it because it's the countdown to the end for Keegan and Newcastle in terms of him being a player and football with Keegan. He's very much on borrowed time. It's been a fantastic relationship that he's had with Newcastle United, but he still ends on a hell of a high. He scores the opening goal in the 4-0 win against Derby County, and in proper Roy of the Rovers fashion, he does get the opening goal in that last game on the final day at home to Brighton and Hove Albion.
Well, yeah, and this is a very memorable occasion as well. Obviously, for a number of reasons. So, firstly, this promotion was already sealed by this point, so it was a celebration. It was the final game of the season, and we knew even from the start that Newcastle were going up. So, yes, point one is it's a big celebration. So, the atmosphere obviously reflects that. But then you add into the mix that this was Keegan's final game, which was well known by this point. So there's the desperate need to see him off in style. Now, there'll be another seeing off in a few days' time that we'll come on to, I'm sure. But this was the final proper game for him and making sure that the occasion lived up to it, which it very much did. It was a 3-1 win over Brighton. But to add to that, and this was Brighton, who'd been in the cup final the year before as well. It was a good team that they were up against too, but they took them apart. But to add to it, though, yes, Keegan scored the first goal, but then the other two goals were scored by Beardsley and Waddle. And I think that's really quite a significant thing as well. You talked about how many goals the three of them contributed across the season. It was ridiculous. Keegan himself got 27 to be the top scorer. Beardsley wasn't too far behind. But for the three of them to be the scorers on this day was just the perfect end point to this season, looking back with hindsight. I think you had the departing hero, the sort of greatest player that had played for Newcastle for many a decade. You had the two upcoming local stars who would go on to absolute terrific things, mostly elsewhere. But, at this point, that wasn't known. Here we had the departing hero and we had the two young superstars from the area who were now going to take us on into the First Division without Keegan. But it appeared as though they were well placed to carry the torch that Keegan had left them and had passed on to them. It was kind of symbolic in many ways, I think, and it was a glorious game. And there were some wonderful goals in that game as well. It was a fabulous occasion all round.
It was, this is very much, Keegan, still being able to turn it on, and yeah, there's he's had this game against Liverpool, which has persuaded him not to take himself into the First Division. That decision not to do that, not to go into the First Division, that's Keegan being a hard taskmaster to himself, because it's not going to be Liverpool every week that we face it. Yet something within him, that wouldn't be enough to be able to kind of go up against maybe even half of the First Division, maybe more. He could maybe feel like he could still cut it with, 3/4 of the First Division the following season. But the fact that he felt that he couldn't punch his weight against the very best was the difference in making that decision to say, I'll have one more spin of that First Division with them next season.
Yeah, I think so. And I think this is probably a trait that many of those who played at the very top, and Keegan really was at the very top when he was in his prime, they must struggle when that decline inevitably comes. Because while you or I might think, well, yes, you think of it rationally, and he'd have been perfectly capable of playing against most First Division sides and still doing well. When you've actually been at the pinnacle for so long, that must be hard to make that adjustment to be back in the top flight, but not able to quite do what you used to be able to do. I don't know. That's just a sort of possible theory about it all, I guess. But equally, one thing about this though is, and it's a trait that Keegan showed again and again and again, is once he's made up his mind on something, that is that. It takes an awful lot of persuading to change it. It did manage to get changed only on a couple of occasions later in his career as a manager, but it was very much, he was stubborn at times, and I think in this case he'd had 3 months or so, or 4 months even, to dwell on what had happened that night at Anfield. And his decision, he was quite adamant that was going to be the case. And obviously by this point there was pretty much no going back. It was all done and dusted. You can't have the send off he was about to have and then change your mind. That would have been that would have been worse than anything that happened in Dallas, I think. But I think once he was fully set on something, he wasn't the kind of person who was going to change.
He wasn't for shifting, was he? And probably remains so to this very day. The final act, a testimonial game, awarded him a few days after the Brighton game, 5 days after the Brighton game, I think it was. Liverpool invited to St James Park for his eventual farewell. A game that ended in a 2-2 draw, with both Keegan and McDermott fittingly scoring for Newcastle United. Souness and Michael Robinson, the late wonderful Michael Robinson, getting the goals for Liverpool, and then the helicopter. It's an evocative image, and entirely in keeping with Keegan.
Absolutely. You think about it now, and he couldn't have gone out in any other way. This is how it had to be. It had to be something extravagant and different. And again, I remember this occasion vividly. Now, this was a time, I was in first school at this point. Like I say, I was 9, very, very early on. And at this point, I remember lots of the chatter in the playground, again, really, really strongly about this game. Now, my school, where I was, Arthur Cox's son went to school in the same, he was the year above me, but he was there. So on the playground, you had him, who was always decked out in the most glorious silver away kit that Newcastle had in this year, which is still for sale now in the club shop. So evocative is it? It was a beautiful thing. But anyway, he was always decked out in the latest kits. But aside from that, there was a load of chatter, obviously, about this game. And I do recall there was a couple of people in my class who were going along. I sadly wasn't. But one of the guys who was going along was going around offering to buy a match program for everybody. And you had to give him a quid and you'd get a match program bought for you. And that's what I did. So I got myself a match program from this occasion, the cover of which obviously had a picture of Keegan. He was waving goodbye, dressed out in his black and white kit. And on it just said, Auf Wiedersehen, Kev. Obviously in reference to a popular TV show and I guess the fact that he'd played in Germany as well. But yeah, what an occasion. And I suppose the irony that the game that had caused him to decide to quit was against Liverpool, and here he was against Liverpool again. Now, this was Liverpool playing a strong lineup. I think it was only Ian Rush, really, who wasn't in this from the main starting 11 for Liverpool, who were, a week or so away from a European Cup final?
13 days away from the European Cup final, and 10 of the 11 that start against Roma in Stadio Olimpico
started this game.
Ian Rush is the only one that sits it out. Michael Robinson plays.
That's incredible.
who himself does get a run out as a substitute in Rome, just under a fortnight later.
Yeah, and that in itself is absolutely ridiculous. But again, I suppose I don't know what that says. It's a sign of the times, I suppose, that they didn't have squad depth and rotation just wasn't a thing. But equally, it's probably part of the respect that Liverpool as a club would have had for Kevin Keegan, of course.
Totally.
Wanting to be a part of this occasion and put on a show. Really, and thankfully Liverpool didn't take it too far and put on a suitable show by not thumping Newcastle and letting Keegan score and have his final day. But yes, then the helicopter appeared on the pitch. Into it he got, and off he went, and soon off to live in Spain and forget all about football, never to return. So he thought.
Exactly, and but of course he would, and it would be Newcastle. The only club, I think, that could possibly have swayed him. That those heartstrings pulled on again, tugged on again to drift into Newcastle to save them from the jaws of Division 3
Yep,
in
absolutely.
in 1991-92. Again, give us the juxtaposition of the returning Messiah. We'll skip what went on in between.
Skip a few years in between. Yeah, it didn't go so well. Skip past those seasons and get back to a more positive thing. Yes. When he came back, Newcastle were... You couldn't even say they were in the same predicament they were when he came as a player, because it was worse than that. They really were on the verge of dropping into the third tier, which Newcastle have never, ever done. And I don't know, we'd had years of disappointment, of false hope. So yes, I guess we can touch on it a little bit, is that yes, they went up, but it didn't go well. Arthur Cox had gone after failed discussions about player recruitment, I think, and the budget he might have, false promises perhaps, or not getting what he was wanting, and not getting the support he felt he should have done. So he was gone, and Jack Charlton came in, and that was utterly different in style and approach. And then ultimately you have Waddle leaving, then have Beardsley leaving, you have Gascoigne coming through, and then you have Gascoigne leaving. And that's just the way it was. It was a club that sank back to the second tier, but then very nearly sank yet further. We had went close to coming up again with Jim Smith, lost out in the playoffs to the club that shall not be named one year, and but then they sank much further. We had Ozzy Ardila in charge for a while, and while he was all for blooding youngsters and giving people a try, that kind of also showed that he had no option other than to blood youngsters and give them their chance, because there was pretty much no alternative at times. And while he was a lovely guy, it wasn't working out. And then he was gone, and we're on the precipice of falling into the third division. Then it all changes, and Kevin Keegan comes back, and instantly, the whole mood changes. And it really was in an instant. It's almost hard to comprehend the transformation of just atmosphere in general. Just you go from something that's dying on its knees to suddenly having a feeling that actually it's all going to be okay again. And this is what I talked about with Keegan, the player, and how his infectious enthusiasm. He made everybody believe. He really, and this is where it's daft, of course, but the returning Messiah and all of that stuff. It's like, well, it's about belief, and it's about that having faith in something. And it sounds ludicrous, and I appreciate it is. But like I said before, Newcastle fans have had slim pickings over a lot of these years of hope and people to cling on to. And Keegan really, really was that person to cling on to. I remember his first game in charge because I was there. It was against Bristol City, and it was a 3-0 win. And suddenly everything seemed to be more positive again. But, you can't polish a turd, as they say. It was still a poor squad that that didn't instantly shoot up the table. It was a bit dicey, and the aforementioned David Kelly, who will forever remain a hero to all Newcastle fans, scoring some vital goals right at the end of the season to ensure survival. But then 1 year later, they'd won the second tier at a canter. They began the following season with 10 or 11 wins in a row, something along those lines. And this was, a couple of months after almost falling into the third tier. The transformation was astonishing. Now, it does go hand in hand with a boardroom transformation as well. We've got John Hall taking over around this time too, just prior to Keegan's arrival. And that certainly made a difference, because suddenly there was a little bit of boardroom ambition as well. But without him in charge, it wouldn't have gone the way it did, and certainly not that rapidly. It was astonishing. But, the whole mood and positivity around the club and the city in general was all just cling on to his coattails, and just he was the instigator of it all. And I know sort of later in his managerial career, and obviously what happened with England and various things, he isn't quite thought of as well as he was in the 90s with Newcastle. his overall managerial legacy isn't quite what Newcastle people would have you believe. And his second stint obviously wasn't quite the same, but that was in a different time altogether. But really, in these years in the 90s, obviously we all know how close they came to the very top and all of that. But given where we'd come from and given the way he galvanized everything, he is still held up quite rightly as one of the greatest that Newcastle's ever had, without question.
Fantastic. I mean, it is worth saying as well that testimonial that he had against Liverpool, he refused the proceeds of it and donated it to the club in order to put it towards the purchase of a replacement for him.
Which
he'd have been better off just keeping the money.
Yes, he would.
But again, it's just kind of like a mark of Keegan the man, and his sentiment, because a lot was made of the wages that he was on at Newcastle when he first signed, a reputed £3,000 a week, much of which was reputedly funded by a local brewery.
It was indeed. No, this isn't just reputed. This is true, and that was fundamental to him even coming back. It needed the money from Scottish and Newcastle breweries to actually make it happen.
Absolutely outstanding. There's some great footage of a young Newcastle fan who doesn't look old enough to drink. In some of the news footage of the opening day, his debut against QPR, where it shows the goals and his goal that opens it, cracking goal at the near post, and then a little interview with Keegan in which he mentions that line of kind of like, I just wanted to stay with the fans forever and all that type of stuff. And it's a Newcastle fan in a pub, and because of this story about the brewery paying at least part of his wages, the story being that we need to drink more beer to pay for Keegan. and this lad downs a pint, and I've seen many a pint downed in one. I must have done it myself at some point, foolhardy points, but I have never seen a pint downed as quickly as the one that lad did. And he didn't look 18. He didn't look 18. That's the thing. He looked about 16 or 17, and it was just a YouTube klaxon. Do go and find just go onto YouTube, put Keegan plays, Keegan at Newcastle as a player, and this news bulletin will pop up, and it is glorious news. But there's so much going on in it. But that lad who looks underage for drinking, down in that pint in like not much more than a second, it's unreal. It just goes. It's like, wow.
Oh, it's good to have a talent, I suppose, isn't it?
Unreal.
Well, speaking of young Newcastle fans as well,
totally is.
But another young Newcastle fan who had a part in the Keegan story was at that farewell game. One of the ball boys was a young Alan Shearer.
Certain Alan Shearer,
yeah. So, and who would be signed by Kevin Keegan, of course, for a world record fee 12 years later.
Yeah, and the wheel going full turn. Our finally section. The television on the day Keegan signed for Newcastle. It's the school summer holidays, so we've got some stuff to watch in the morning, and then I'll run you through the what's on in the evening. BBC One from 9:30. Jack and Ori, Take Heart, and Why Don't You? ITV is showing the Swiss Family Robinson, the history of the Grand Prix. Interesting viewing for children. This one, the Near Death Experience, in the 1976 German Grand Prix.
Lovely.
Followed by Paint Along with Nancy. What's taking you? What are you leaning to? What are you leaning towards? On the morning of the arrival of Keegan.
Well, I wouldn't be painting with Nancy, but I equally doubt I'd have been watching the history of the Grand Prix either. I remember Why Don't You quite well. So, and the song is stuck in my head still. I could recite that one easily.
I can hear it now.
Exactly. So, I'd definitely go for that one.
Why Don't You? It was quite anarchic at times as well.
Yeah, it was glorious.
Yeah,
glorious stuff.
On that one. In the evening, obviously, there's absolutely, apart from a Laurel and Hardy a film of some description, there's virtually nothing to watch on BBC Two, and Channel 4 does not exist at this point. Channel 4 does not yet exist. It's a month or two away. So in the evening, your choices are Bellamy's Backyard Safari, which I seem to remember he shrank down and he'd be walking in the grass and there'd be like a giant ant and and all this type of stuff.
Oh, God.
Top of the Pops, fronted by Kid Jensen. Fame and the Des O'Connor Tonight Show, which I've totally forgot that was on the BBC before it switched to ITV. The guests are the Nolans, Janet Brown, and Jerry Seinfeld.
Wow.
Whereas on ITV, your options are Robin's Nest, Sapphire and Steel, and a movie, Robin and Marion, Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn playing middle-aged versions of Robin Hood and Marion, Maid Marian.
Okay. All right then. Interesting. I think, I guess from my perspective, Top of the Pops and what else did you say was on BBC One? There was something else that
there was Fame.
Fame, that's it. Yes.
Yeah,
and this will come up again in the music when we get to that. That I do recall watching that. It probably wasn't necessarily my choice, but that was, as a family telly, and it was on. But yeah, Top of the Pops and then Fame, I think, would have been it.
Definitely Top of the Pops for me. I think our Alison, my sister, would have insisted on Fame. Sapphire and Steel could be utterly terrifying for a young child at times. Robin's Nest, loved the theme tune. No, absolutely adored.
I don't remember that one at all.
I remember that. It was the one of two sequels to Man About the House, the other being George and Mildred. But Bellamy's Backyard Safari. Totally.
Well, I mean, that sounds. Yeah, I mean that doesn't seem like a very suitable title.
Yeah, I'd completely forgotten about this until I saw the name of it and then the synopsis and thought, yeah, because it was some bizarre thing where he would shrink down and then it was kind of like, here's an acorn. No,
oh my God.
There's an ant walking past with a leaf, that type of thing. It was just the most utterly, this is what's in your back garden type thing.
Maybe he inspired Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Utterly unreal. Maybe, yeah. It was very much of that type of thing going on. Someone clearly was sat in a London hotel room thinking, I can make a movie out of this crazy crap. The top four, the top 40 on the day of Keegan's arrival. Aidan, I did send you the official top 40. What are you recording illegally off the radio?
Well, we've got Come On Eileen as top of the charts at this point. Now that seems to have been fairly ubiquitous ever since, but it's a very catchy song, so that would have probably been in there even without all the hindsight of knowing it so well since then. Fame, as we mentioned, that was at number 3.
Yeah,
I say.
Irene Cara.
And oddly enough, this was actually playing in the changing room at the gym when I went the other morning. So that the strange things that go on. Anyway, the current me. And the urge to portray myself as being a bit of a cooler young kid than I really was. I glanced all the way down to number 40 and I see The Clash with Rock the Casbah. But that's not the truth of my childhood. Obviously, I wasn't that cool. And that I can't imagine many people. What was I in 1982? So at this point, I was still 7. I can't imagine many 7-year-olds who were really into The Clash. Eye of the Tiger was at number 2, though, and that's at least got some street cred about it, and that I very much do recall from the time. So I'll get away with saying that one. There's a couple of others that's my real answer. That's what I would have probably have illegally recorded at the time. But there's a couple of others that caught my attention, and it's bizarre how this happens, though. There's one by the Stranglers called Strange Little Girl. Now, I'd forgotten this song ever existed until reading it on this chart list, but my parents had this on some cassette at the time, so I know this song and I could hum it along now. I could recite some of the lyrics because obviously we didn't have endless streaming or whatever. We only had the music that we had unless you were listening to the radio. So Strange Little Girl by the Stranglers is one that I do recall. But like I say, I'd forgotten it existed until you sent this. The other one that sticks in my mind when I saw it again listed here, and again I'd forgotten about this one, was The Clapping Song.
The clapping song, yeah.
This is me in, I say, year 3 at first school. There seemed to be an obsession with this one.
I guess there will have been school discos.
Yeah.
Where they would have just played what was in the top 40. So this is why we have another reason why we have this. Don't go by Yazoo at number 4. It's in my head. And, that's where it stays. Yeah.
But obviously, the clapping song by its very nature was the kind of thing designed to stick in your mind, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
There was definite obsession with that from many of the people in my class and my school. So yeah, that one, seeing that again listed, it's absolutely bizarre. You forget these things ever happened, and then when you see a mention of it, it's just stuck in your head again.
Totally is. I Eat Cannibals, Toto Kiola. There's some Arthur Daly. He's all right. There's some absolute shockers in there. Total and utter shockers. Yeah, not going to be taping much off the top 40 in this particular week. The Only Way Out, Cliff Richard. Yeah.
It's also got Driving in My Car by Madness, which
it has.
That, I don't know. To my mind, that is probably one of the worst Madness songs.
It is.
There is.
It really is.
It's just not good.
There are some cracking Madness songs, but that
is not it. Yeah.
Save a really Prayer by Duran Duran at 27. A bit of a nod towards that, I suppose. But yeah, really, really not much else that's worth recording. So to the cinema we go instead. What are we watching, Aidan? In May 1984, just as promotion to the First Division is clinched, Keegan's headed off in his helicopter, and we're going watching a movie.
Well, way ahead in these ratings is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Now, that to my mind is nothing like as good as Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Absolutely.
It had that annoying little kid for one. However, this is me thinking back on it now or appreciating it from having seen it many times since. Again, at the time, I'm quite sure that little kid really appealed. I'm sure. And I would have enjoyed this film at the time. So yeah, that was so far and way ahead of everything else in this year that it was clearly the biggest thing. The current me, again, the effortlessly cool me that I am now, would say this is Spinal Tap, which is a bit further down the list. But, it's a fragrant lie to say that I had any awareness of that at the time.
Absolutely, at that point.
Certainly
in
not.
time, yeah.
Certainly not. Far too young.
Definitely avoiding Friday the 13th, final chapter at number 13. Yeah. Spookily at number 13.
Well, yeah, I mean that's freaky in and of itself. But that certainly wouldn't have been allowed at that stage. There's Romancing the Stone. That was a decent film, I think. There's also Footloose in there, which I've thankfully never ever seen, and I never ever will. But the song again, it's stuck.
I'm with you on that. I've never seen that. Splash at number 9 is an early Tom Hanks movie. Is it Daryl Hannah? As a mermaid.
Oh
he dates a mermaid.
Police Academy's in there. Yeah, now that's terrific. But again, I wouldn't have seen this at the time. I'm sure that would have been a few years later that I got to appreciate that one properly. But that's a superb film.
But in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in May 1984 is grossing $51 million, over $51.5 million. And the next highest grossing movie is called Breakin', which I have no recollection of whatsoever. Just under 24 million, which shows just how big Indiana Jones.
Well, it's a struggling young jazz dancer meets up with two break dancers and they become a sensation. So I'm not surprised you have no recollection of that.
No recollection.
That sounds awful.
So it does sound awful, but no, it was the second highest grossing movie of May 1984. Apparently, certainly in the United States.
Yeah, but Indiana Jones. It's not lasted well, has it?
No, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Yeah, it's the weakest of the 3 original Indiana Jones movies, but it did have a fantastic start to it, which must have been ludicrously difficult to do. It's the one where he's handed over the remains of the emperor, whatever he is, and then kind of like he drinks the poison, and then the antidote's in a glass vial, and it ends up on the dance floor amongst a load of ice, and it's just like a properly It's a wildly constructed and choreographed start to that film. Yet it should have just stopped at that once he gets on the plane after he's escaped, because it's all a bit out there after that.
Yeah, but I guess for kids, it's still just exciting. So, thinking back to our youth, I think it would have been all fun and games watching that
Absolutely. A non-football sporting event from the summer of 1984 that made an impression on you while waiting impatiently for First Division football.
Well, I can go one better. I can give you one from when he signed and one from when he left, if you like. For when he signed, summer of 82, well, actually it would have been after he was already there, because I think it was a little bit after the summer. My only recollection of anything non-football related and sporting wise is a random brief moment from the Brisbane Commonwealth Games, and it's the image of Alan Wells and Mike McFarlane sharing a gold medal in the 200 meters.
Oh,
that
excellent.
is literally the only thing I can recall about it, but I must have watched some of it. And I think this was in September, October of 82.
Yeah, I do remember they'd always have like Commonwealth Games breakfast program fronted by the.
It was probably something like that where I saw it. Yeah,
the I don't know, the icon, shall we say, that is Frank Boff.
Yeah, it will have been something like that on the way before getting carted off to school.
Before being led off to school.
Yeah. So but that is the only moment from that I remember. But 84, I remember a lot more, and this is the Los Angeles Olympics, the summer of 84. It just was so vivid and bright, and the glorious sunshine, and the TV coverage was, obviously host broadcast to do all the graphics and all of that stuff. So it was all jazzed up American stuff with massive writing everywhere and all vivid and bright and just wonderful. And it was such glorious sunshine naturally. And equally, any sporting event that opens with a guy flying around the stadium with a jetpack on his back, that is going to be eye-opening for any young lad watching on. And it certainly was for me. And I remember all sorts of things from this Summer Olympics, Seb Coe doing well, Steve Cram from a local perspective coming in just behind him, Carl Lewis, obviously, and various other big moments. Daley Thompson whistling whilst the national anthem played. Things like that are very much firmly stuck in my mind. Tessa Sanderson as well. I think to my young mind, it never, because I hadn't had an awareness of the previous Olympics really, to me, it almost seemed like, an Olympics doesn't have all those Eastern European types in them. This is just how it is. It's all just fun for everyone else who isn't from the dour East. But there we go. And that meant we won more. But yeah, that's what I remember really vividly from that summer. And I do remember, again, coming down of a morning and seeing the action that was going on there. Again, probably just what had happened later during the night that I wasn't able to see, because it'll have been, I guess the live stuff will have been through the afternoon and into the night. But I think, again, there will have been a breakfast thing that wrapped it all up. And that's what I recall.
It was all wall to wall as well, because this is an era in which, that 84 Olympics was like on every channel that we had accessible to us. By then, Channel 4 was actually in operation. The only time Channel 4 showed the Olympics, and they did it kind of like half in conjunction with ITV on one side, whereas the BBC were showing it as well. So you had the BBC's coverage, you had ITV showing it, and then Channel 4 were doing like the overnight stuff into the early morning. It was absolutely everywhere, the Olympics and the Summer Olympics.
This is how sport should be.
As it should be. It was literally wall-to-wall Olympics. The back pages in the week leading up to Kevin Keegan's arrival at Newcastle. George Best is in action for Glentoran in a friendly against Manchester United. Bobby Robson's last act as Ipswich Town manager. It's a 4-3 win on penalties against Brighton to clinch third place in the pre-season Eindhoven tournament.
Oh, well, let's hope his luck on penalty shootouts continues in his England career.
Absolutely. PSV beat Standard Liège in the final. Future PSV coach, Bobby Robson. A little bit of symbiosis there. There's a lot of penalties knocking around in the pre-season tournaments. Liverpool are beaten on penalties by Malaga in the final of the Marbella International Tournament. Tottenham are beaten...
Which is ironically where Keegan had moved to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely is. Tottenham are beaten on penalties in the third place playoff of the Amsterdam tournament by FC Cologne. Resplendent as they were with the Machiavellian Tony Schumacher, fresh from his near decapitation of Patrick Battiston in the 1982 World Cup. Aston Villa are under a fraud probe. Director of Public Prosecutions have been called in to study the club's spending. The police are alerted by allegations that many of the receipts for building work on the new Villa Park North Standard mysteriously vanished. Very 1982, sorry. Peter Shilton signed for Southampton. He makes his debut in a friendly against Utrecht in the Netherlands. Kevin Keegan's last game for Southampton is Peter Shilton's first game for the club. There are Forest representatives in attendance to watch Hans van Breukelen, who they will soon sign. Michael Robinson and Steve Foster put in transfer requests at Brighton after the chairman, Mike Bamber, pulled the plug on a move for Charlie George. They are placated and go on to reach the FA Cup final later that season. Mark Chamberlain is set to become the 4th Division's most expensive export, £150,000 to Stoke City from local rivals Port Vale. Anything in particular?
You don't cross that divide lightly, do you?
That's a hell of a divide to cross. But 4th Division Port Vale to 1st Division Stoke City. Anything in particular that stands out from the back pages there? This is the Daily Mirror and the Daily Mail eagerly awaiting the start of football proper and just trying to find as many stories and non-stories as possible.
Well, we all love pre-season tournaments, of course, and I'm sure we'll do a whole series on them. But it's quite interesting that Keegan did go on Southampton's pre-season tour or whatever that they did. I do wonder if he just didn't like Peter Shilton, so he turns up, and next thing you know, Keegan's off.
I'm off.
That's what stands out from that. Maybe he didn't like Shilton's politics. Perhaps maybe they fell out. I don't know. That's an interesting one. Now it's strange all the focus on. It's like the each of the little pieces being moved around, the various chess pieces of falling into place for the things that become familiar, like I say about Van Breukelen. And the Brighton ones are interesting. What might have happened had they been told to do one in
the
that
summer
little
of 82,
wrangle? Yeah. Interesting. And yet they came so close to FA Cup glory a few more months down the line.
They did indeed. Aidan, Module 5, it's been outstanding. Thank you so much for going in on all things Kevin Keegan, 1982 to 1984.
Well, when it comes to Kevin Keegan and Newcastle United, there is no other way than all in.
Excellent. All in, all positivity. Excellent. And there we will draw the line before Jack Charlton rears his ugly head. Thank you. All that leaves me to do is say thank you for listening. Please do spread the word. This has been Module 5 of Your Boys Took One Hell of a Beating, the definitive 1980s podcast. I think it's probably the only one out there, actually, that's fully dedicated to the 1980s. Do listen again out for Module 6, and Aidan will be back very soon with something maybe a bit Welsh tinged. Thank you and goodbye.